Souse us therefore in the powdering tub of thy mercy,
that we may be tripes fit for the heavenly table.
Welcome, Meatsmiths. You are listening to a Meatsmith harvest,
restoring husbandry to prosperity
by means of the traditions of our fathers.
This dialogue picks up where we left off in our last episode's conversation. You can find part 1 on our website, YouTube, or iTunes. If the content resonates with you, please consider supporting our team by going to patreon.com/Meatsmith and donating a small monthly pledge. This goes directly toward more free media headed your way. Thanks for staying tuned for part 2.
Yeah.
I think it's Jane Grigson that says something like, modern women are expected to be bored with domesticity.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't find the joy in it.
That's right. You have to have a huge ideological campaign to make us forget that is the good life.
Yeah.
That those domesticity is, oh no, that's boring. That's below you. That's beneath you. Yeah, I think if there maybe the highest thing we could say about farming is that secondary cause that we participate in, because which is sort of like, maybe you could help us flesh this out. There's a potency in nature, right? There is a potency in the soil. There's a potency in wild grass to be cultivated by man to become corn, right? A crop. There is a potency in the bitter little crab apple to become a delicious cider apple. And part of what our agriculture does is reduce that potency to act. And which is I feel like that is different than merely textile type work, whereby, speaking of labor again generally, where we take raw materials and we almost unknit them substantially and create a different thing and force it into a totally different shape and different function. Like we almost change the substantial form of things. I guess we do that all the time. And whereas agriculture is different. Raising pigs is different even in all of its ways, because you have to actually work with the interior principle of nature that's there. Again, with our technology, we can kind of come in with steel and concrete or whatever and pneumatic power, and we can just totally alter it. But if you're in the smallness of a domestic setting, you are limited to working with the potency that is in nature, with the order that is already there, which I think is that's what cultivating is. And I think of that when when you're raising pigs, like I always say, if you're going to grow pigs on your land, you're not going to fence them by coercion. It is going to be a salutary agreement between you and the pig. If the pig is going to stay around, it's because the pig chooses to, and it likes to be around. So immediately we have this arrangement that is a cooperation. You, with your reason, have to discern the nature of the pig and what will persuade it to stay. And even when it comes to how you cut up an animal to get the greatest yield, you have to discern the order that is there in a quadruped carcass. And then cooperate with it, because it's got all this potency. And it seems like our job, as image bearers, is to reduce it to act, to make it into ham, and then to cook it, which is the beautiful thing about even the culinary arts in general, is that they are docile. They're docile to the order that is there and the raw materials, and cultivating them into rather than just flattening them all out and turning them into Doritos or something, which is like a non-food.
Yeah.
But I digress.
Well, in a very similar way that I mean, that's kind of the beauty of farming and rural living, is that you are able to, if you elect to participate in this way of life, which I highly recommend, but you're able to be co-creators, right? Because God is the great, everything has being, everything exists. This is kind of like the universal effect, and it belongs to the universal cause to bring about the universal effect. So it belongs to God to produce everything. So everything is in the state of being, is directly dependent upon God for its existence, not only at the moment of its creation, but also for a sustained being.
Yeah.
This ultimately even includes the human will, which is phenomenal to think about. So it belongs to God to reduce anything that in existence into existence, because he is existence per se. And we, right, if we choose to farm, are able to participate in that by reducing things from their potential being to actual being, right? To not the same scale as God, but we're able to render those potencies, as you mentioned, those potential potencies to actuality, which they wouldn't be able to do on their own, right? But it's because we are able to be this active extrinsic agent, acting upon it, and taking these, what are known in philosophical circles as these passive potencies, and by our active agency are able to turn it into something absolutely sublime, something glorious, which it wouldn't be able to do on its own.
Yes, which is
that's marvelous.
It is. It's totally marvelous, because I think it's an analog of grace, of salvation. It isn't salvation, but it seems like, we are the kind of things, by virtue of our immortal souls that God has given to us, we are the kind of thing that could be saved with grace alone. We could actually be elevated to contemplate God by grace. Similarly, the wild pig is the kind of thing. This is a way lower level, but it is the kind of thing that can be domesticated. And this is not a repudiation of that creature's nature. It gets tricky, because it's like, well, is it the fulfillment of that creature's nature? And I think it kind of is. Like, I think, even in the case of domesticated canines, I think it's wrong to look at, a domestic dog and say that it has been diluted from its original glory as a wolf. That's totally wrong. It's been fulfilled. It is analogous to, what God does to us. We can actually cultivate nature, creatures, plants, and we can make a wild creature look in our eyes and want to do what we want it to do. That's incredible. That is an elevation, if not a fulfillment of that dog's nature. And I think of all domestication in this way. Like, we take the Bos aurochs, the enormous animal, bovine, ranging the European plain, if there are plains in Europe. Yeah, there are. And we can actually cultivate it to produce more milk than it needs for its own calves. More milk than we can consume, so we have to invent cheese to preserve it. And then the Bos aurochs, we say, went extinct. It's like, no, it was elevated. It was cultivated into the amicable Jersey cow in your backyard.
Yep. And we can say that too about all things. And the ultimate perfection of some of these natural elements, of course, is their use in liturgies, right? I mean, you can take a wild grape, and through generations of cultivation, able to produce a wine, which then can be made into Christ's blood. I mean, degrees of elevation as a consequence of our activities and God's perfecting of those activities even further, which is absolutely marvelous.
Yeah. And is reason. Yeah. And it's, the more if you meditate on that, we think about just the production of grapes, that it's elevated to that degree. And I think if we knew history, all of the events, because we don't, that would be the birth of social order and all of culture. It's from the cultivation of those things for the right worship of God. And I love the, Father Vincent McNabb has a neat chapter on that, and he, in one of his books, where he talks about why he takes the Exodus as the example. They were going to the land. The Hebrews, when they were fleeing Egypt, they were going to the promised land, and they had to take all of their livestock. And it wasn't necessarily just for their own survival. It was because God was going to teach them how to worship. Mm-hmm. And they needed the livestock for that end. Mm-hmm. And so he took them out to the land to do liturgy, to worship. That was the first cause. That was the main reason.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And that's what gives them permanence on the land. Also, the moment that they don't worship God the way he showed them, that's when they lose the land. Yeah. And this, I think this is a functional element of reality. Like, this is not just an imposed abstract interpretation. This is a functional element of reality, because there is an order to reality. Just like you said, God is at the top of that order. Mm-hmm. And when we adhere to that order, and we regard everything in its proper place in that hierarchy, then we have a thing called peace, which is the tranquility of order. Mm-hmm. And so even if we grow the perfect tomato, and it is so pure you can't believe it. It's the purest, most organic thing in the cosmos. If it doesn't find its place in that grand scheme of order, then it won't last. It won't last long, because it's fractured from reality itself.
Yeah, that's great.
From order itself.
So, I mean, we can talk about the necessity of all these various bodily goods, and how these bodily goods are best fulfilled through kind of a more intentional wedding to the land, and as a consequence, it kind of curbs all these excesses that we've been talking about. Same with riches, obviously, right? If you have a superabundance of lambs one year, you're still limited as far as how much you can sell and how much money you can reap from those sales, mm-hmm. right? So there's a natural check, I think, even with the pursuit of riches, which are necessary for the contemplative life, the good life. But one thing that we haven't talked about, and it's essential, is kind of the epistemological benefit of rural living. We kind of don't consider this often, but as an educator, I think it's absolutely essential. Yeah. Namely, in order for us to contemplate, we need all knowledge, according to Aristotle, originates in the senses. And so we need to have this robust sensory database, if you will, mm-hmm. of memory in order to draw from, in order to think well. Mm-hmm. And of course, you have to have recourse to being. You have to have recourse to reality, because all knowledge originates in the senses. Mm-hmm. And so you have to have a real tactile, earthbound, experiential, or what the philosophers often call poetic, experience of reality in order to ponder, in order to mm-hmm. contemplate. I see that in the impoverishment of that is immediate. If anyone has ever tried to teach individuals who have been born into and nursed on screen technology. Yeah. Because with screen technology, it's no longer experiencing reality, but it's experiencing reality mediated through technology. And as a consequence of that, they're just impoverished. They cannot think. And so the benefit, again, of in regards to the necessity of rural life, of the necessity of bodily needs, is that epistemological foundation for thinking. I saw it all the time in the classroom, is that, I teach a lot of the great books, and you cannot understand, let alone sacred scripture, the good and great books, you can't understand if you haven't experienced the things that the authors are referring to. Like there's a famous scene, for example, in the Odyssey, where Odysseus is described. He returns home after years at sea and many trials and tribulations. He finally returns to Ithaca. And all these men, the suitors, are pursuing his beloved Penelope, eating him, drinking him out of house and home, and just making a mess of things, complete disorder of the domestic order of things. And he comes home, and obviously he's a bit upset, right? He's a bit livid at the situation, and he's going to clean house. But throughout the process of his travels, he learns to be a contemplator, right? He learns to be able to use his intellect to control his lower passions, one of them being the irascible appetite, right? Which wants to fight back when there's an injustice. But he realizes to act immediately would be his death and the death of his son and probably the murder of his wife. And so he's able to use his intellect to control his lower irascible appetite in a very beautiful way. And Homer describes, and again, you would not know this if you didn't have poetic knowledge. He describes Odysseus like a sausage upon a grill. He's twisting and turning, just about to burst. Right? And if you never cooked a sausage on an open hearth, you wouldn't have no idea of this. And the reality is, it's a beautiful analogy. Now, people could be, I know there's different interpretations of that. People are saying, well, Homer's actually intentionally referring to him as a sausage because he's trying to dismiss the heroism of Odysseus, right? Which is possible. Right. But nonetheless, it's a very poignant, descriptive, and very good analogy of what's happening internally to Odysseus, the character. And again, we would miss that completely. I mean, our eyes would look at it, we would read, but we would miss the profound insight the author is trying to communicate because we just buy hot dogs that are pre-cooked and eat them.
That's right. They're pre-cooked and we don't have to cook them properly.
Right. There's no fat in there, right? And there's no potential for explosion. But if anyone has a homemade sausage that's laden with fat, right, knows that potential is real. And the last thing you want to do is burst that casing as you're cooking it and lose all the wonderful flavor and juice. But
all the work going into it.
I think and your example of Odysseus is perfect because it's literature, and I was an English major. So I happen to know that all of the scholars in the English departments throughout the universities of the world, or at least of this country, probably the world, don't know how to cook sausage because when they read that passage, the least horrible interpretation of it is the one that you mentioned, that they're trying to degrade Odysseus and his stature by likening him to a sausage. If only that were as bad as it gets. No, because they're so divorced from it, they create an entire department ordered around gender studies, and so that sausage is hijacked by Freud and comes to mean the dumbest things you could. You have to be educated for 7 years to even think these things. They're so unbelievably dumb. But again, they are the pure luxury of overindulgent people alienated from the material cause of their existence, from the base of reality, from reality. They're alienated from reality. And we even see that in like the history of Western philosophy. We had to undermine the basis of what you were saying in St. Thomas Aquinas, which is all, and in Aristotle even, all knowledge comes through the senses. We had to cut that out at the beginning, because so we get, Descartes and then Kant, where it's like, no, you can't trust your senses. Descartes is holding the stick in the water and there's refraction. He's like, look, the stick is bending. I can't trust my eyes. Mm-hmm. And now knowledge doesn't just come through the senses. You might even, or then you get to Kant and all of a sudden it's like, all you can see is your sense data. How do you know there's actually a thing out there beyond? How do you know that there is a noumena out there beyond the phenomena or whatever? And so we had to undercut all of that. But that's why I think the most revolutionary, and I hate the word revolutionary because I don't like revolutions, but in the modern era, the most revolutionary thing you could do is just be a Thomist and believe that all knowledge comes through the senses. Mm-hmm. That is an unbelievably potent reality. It's not even an idea. That's just the way it is. It's very simple.
Yeah, but then if you really fully grasp the significance of that, the first thing you would do, as John Sr. suggests again, is you would smash your television.
Yeah.
Right. If you truly understood that your end is a contemplative understanding, and contemplation requires a robust imagination, and imagination is wedded to experiencing things, because you can only imagine that which you experience. There's like your internal imaginative sense is constantly and necessarily wedded to reality. And St. Thomas will even say that the imagination is what's the word? Infallible. Oh. Right? It cannot be mistaken. Of course, if it's a healthy organ. But if you realize that, then you would be encouraging all those people under your charge and yourself to really try to experience reality in all of its profundity and multiplicity and diversity. And you wouldn't be content with, mass consumption of screen technology, which is, predominant today. And St. Thomas will even speak about the good of the rural life in reference to the political order on this ground of the epistemological grounds, because he says what is necessary for the political order is actually unique individuals.
Yes.
You need to have unique individuals. Distinct and unique individuals, which then can do various, trades and necessities for the governance of the political order. And again, if everyone is experiencing the same things, what we have is a culture that is no longer diverse and distinct. And I'm just thinking back to, I married a wonderful Italian woman, and she has a large Italian family. And I lament the fact that there are no more characters, right? You're used to meet someone and say, he's a character.
Yeah.
Right. And what you meant by that is that is someone who you thinks uniquely. He has a diverse set of experiences. Yeah. And he's able to communicate it in a kind of really vivid and beautiful and unique way. And he's a character. There are no more characters. Everyone is the same, because everyone is experiencing reality as mediated through technology, which is a very curated, right? Yeah. And so there's no individuality. There's no distinction anymore. I see this in my students at all. They're all this. They all look the same. They're just these mass of seed oil consumed blobs. When you have someone that actually has a life of their own in the mind, and usually they're coming from rural Oklahoma or someplace else where they actually experience reality, they stand out like a sore thumb in a very positive, good way.
Yes,
they're characters.
Yes, it's so interesting. Father Speltz mentions that too. The four causes of social order, and that it is the material cause are distinct individuals, and they have to be distinct. And he kind of extrapolates that along. He takes it in the direction of, well, they have to be unequal. That's what that means. Yeah. We differ from each other in specific ways. We're the same in some very important ways, but we differ from each other in our perfections of body and soul. And which I thought was really interesting. And for that, you have to have that inequity, that inequality, in order to have social order at all. So you do not have a group. You do not have, you don't have a social order if everyone is the same. But I love how you're taking it in the direction of, because we all consume and regurgitate the same things, we are all becoming the same. It's erasing the material cause for social order itself.
That's right.
Yeah. Yep. And that is bad. And he even asks, I love it's dangerous. And we see it played out in all of our cities. And I mean, the social order is collapsing.
That's totally. Right. And when everyone's the same, they're very easy to control.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Very easy.
Yeah.
So
they all have the same
characters again.
Yes. Right? Yeah. They all take the same bait. Yeah.
But they're distinct. I mean, if you experience this if you live in rural life.
Yeah.
I mean, your neighbor down the road who, I mean, they're characters. They're just, it's something out of Seinfeld or something, right? They're just and it's so refreshing.
Yeah.
And it can be irritating, but the diversity is something that is greatly to be rejoiced in.
Yes. And I love I think Father Speltz gets this from St. Thomas, where St. Thomas asks the question, why? Why do we have inequality? Why is there, why do some people have less natural gifts, fewer perfections than others? This seems to be like a bad thing. This seems to be undesirable. Why? And the reason that he gives is maybe it's because order is so beautiful that it's worth it. We would be deprived of the beauty of order if we were all the same.
Yeah. And
then he gets into the other, and order is so beautiful. I think we all see that. But he gets into the formal cause of social order, which he says is relation. That is the ratio, that the form, like the blueprint, the abstract, the order of social order are relation. It's a relationship. It's a relation.
Yeah. And of course,
to wife, parents to children.
And Thomas picks this up again. It says, there's distinction, there's relation, but this is all predicated upon being ordered to some end.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Because you can't have relations if you're not ordered to something, one thing as well. And so, all three of these kind of come together to allow for a just and good political society.
Yes. Yeah. And he's the efficient cause of it is that will to that common end, to that end. It is the will to that end. And what the king brings in a just and ordered society is the authority, which is that efficient cause. It's the will to that end. And I always think that's what the king do. That's his role. He's the one individual that leads everyone to the one end, which by God's grace, technically is beatitude, eternal beatitude. And I just think it's so interesting. It puts a whole new, that's social order. That's how it arises. And it puts a whole new color on a society whose founding principle is each individual is actually equal and pursues his or her own distinct ends of life, liberty, and happiness.
That's right.
That's right.
Which is actually pursuing our own goods, which is sort of how we frame capitalism. It's if we all selfishly seek our own good, we rise all the boats, or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is actually that's not what Thomas is talking about at all.
And of course, Thomas is a good biblical scholar, and so you see this in the Judges, right? And as the Judges corrupt throughout the life of Israel, the very end, the last kind of foreboding line is, each man did what he wanted.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, things are bad.
Yeah.
And
each man doing what he wants.
Yeah, as little Democrats were like, "Oh, this sounds wonderful." It's like, no, this is the absolute pinnacle of chaos and disorder.
Yeah. Yes, but we enshrine that in our founding documents.
The poor's head in hand bear I, bedecked with bays and rosemary.
How many people do you know who are building their home culture around seasonal harvest and feasting? Or that are hunting as you are for self-sufficiency and back-to-the-land values? Or that share your artist's passion for human-scale meatcraft? At FarmsteadMeatsmith.com, we've created a community of hundreds of omnivores from around the world with these shared goals, and 2 major places for them to learn from and inspire one another. First, we have our semi-annual hands-on educational event, The Family Pig, here at our Heartland homestead in Oklahoma. Come meet Brandon, get your elbows greasy, and over the course of 3 days, kill, cut, cure, and cook 2 pigs completely. You'll rub those greasy elbows with other meatsmiths from around the country, sharing meals and conversations to inspire you for years to come. Secondly, for more remote learning, over at FarmsteadMeatsmith.com, we host a purely digital membership program with an archive of film and textual resources 5 years deep now. And both our on-site classes and online program include access to our most unique and rewarding private community Facebook page, Meatsmith Table, which is the only international network by and for homesteaders harvesting animals on a domestic scale using traditional and regional methods. We've been told that our classes are life-changing and the membership program unparalleled in quality and quantity. To get a taste of our education, search FarmsteadMeatsmith.com and our YouTube channel for our free films, conversations, and downloads. Explore how we and other meatsmiths across the globe may best come alongside you and support you in building your home around the harvest. Please head to FarmsteadMeatsmith.com today. That's the trio. What's the 3 words of the French Revolution? Fraternity, Liberté. Equality, and liberty. That's right.
Yeah,
and that equality. It erases. So you need that variety. In order for beauty to abound, you need that distinction, and then, of course, with that you have. That's the birth of hierarchy, which is another thing that our culture disdains, has disdain.
Which is distinction,
Right. But then, like you mentioned, the relationship. I mean, what parent doesn't look at their kid, and when that child is starting to emerge with their own distinctive qualities, that's when delight really happens in them.
Or frustration.
Yes.
That's right. At first.
Yes. Which is the ground for the unity of the family, is that distinction.
Well, and then the singleness of will. Yes. So bringing them into our plan, but then your plan.
The pater familias. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Go on.
I was going to say, it's just the French Revolution. Modernism is just a point-by-point attempted refutation of Thomism. Point by point. That's the whole project. That's why it's so, I don't know. There's not a hyperbolic term that is sufficient to describe how important it is or dangerous it is or something to reprise our Catholic philosophy. Like that's the undoing of the whole modern project. It's totally.
But it's difficult for us moderns to, we're moderns, right? This is the air that we breathe, and it's the water that we swim in. And so this seems, and it's been like this for hundreds of years. So this is the cultural norm. And I think, again, the only really way to begin to see the folly of how we have kind of ordered our society, how we understand ourselves, is this kind of slow march through the tradition, right? And then you can see, there is a distinct way by which we can order ourselves and our society and our families, which may be more beneficial in acquiring the good life than the modern project. But we have nothing to turn to, right? Our imaginations have nothing to draw from as an alternative to what we're currently doing.
Yes,
which is one of the main problems.
Yes, and the most fruitful elements that would bear fruit in social order are exactly what modern ideology attacks. Just the idea that it's so hard to think of a good king.
Yeah,
kings are all tyrants in our imagination, in our society's imagination, and it's just that alone. And you think of even the definition of a tyrant for Thomas in De Regno is the definition of the American dream, of an American citizen, which is a tyrant is a king who seeks his own private gain.
His own
That's
benefit.
Yeah, to his own benefit, and neglects the common good. And of course, the common good is not the equal distribution of material. That's another modernist heresy. The common good, the principal common good is peace. It's goods that are shared in common without being reduced in the sharing. That's what common goods are. So very few of them are actually material. Like air. Air might be a common good. We can all breathe. It's not reduced with every breath we take. We help each other out there. But
tyranny.
And there's always going to...
Well, sorry, real quick. Tyranny is described as just seeking your own benefit.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem
private benefit
to an American sensibility. There's like, what's wrong with that? I'm just seeking my own benefit. But there's a subtlety there that, I mean, I look at the general population of this country and this culture, and we're very tyrannical. We are oppressing ourselves by constantly seeking our own. Well, first of all, the benefit that we perceive is actually good for us, which usually is not good for us. But I mean, it's just been flip-flopped. So we've been so afraid of a kingly tyranny, we have been blinded to seeing the tyranny that is actually oppressing us.
A nation of kings. We're a nation of tyrants.
Yeah. I mean, and it's obviously compounded because the good that we're pursuing as a nation is a material good, and it's not the common good. And the material good, or the material good is always by necessity limited because it's material. And again, that cultivates this kind of fear of scarcity, right? If you're enjoying something, that means I can't enjoy it because there's only a certain amount of material reality that can be stretched and pulled and given.
Those are predicates.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's a way in which you can understand it. Well, I'm pursuing my good. And if the good that you're pursuing is truly a common good, a contemplative truth, there's a way in which you could potentially have a virtuous society, but that would require citizens of virtue.
Yes.
That's the only way democracy works. And he talks about that in De Regno too.
Yeah. And maybe the school of that virtue is the rural life, in a preeminent way.
Because this is why it's so good what you're doing and others are doing, is because, again, if we need to begin to rethink what it means to live the good life, and also the requirements, the necessities as instruments for that good life, bodily good, riches, the epistemological foundation, we need to know what that looks like. We need a vision to draw us to. And again, I think what you're doing is providing that vision for so many, right? This is possible. This is a good, and we can live it in our modern society.
Yeah, we just don't tell people when we drive through burgers. But yeah, it's amazing to see too in my children how I think I've been estranged too, honestly, because of I hang out with my children, my family so much, but I've been estranged from the ineptitude that you describe, that you might see in some of your students, where they because they have this sensory deprivation through this sensory overload of the screen, there's an ineptitude. And I think that even the most basic thing that is lost is the law of cause and effect. Like it's so undeniable and it's so unavoidable in nature. And I can see my children grasping that very elemental, basic principle, that you are going to encounter resistance. Everything in the material reality, when you try to impose order thereon, is going to resist you. It is going to resist you. So just engaging with it at all requires fortitude, requires virtue instantly to achieve it, to achieve any end, the simplest end. And if you're of a choleric disposition, you're going to have some pretty big ends. My son Wallace, he gets big ideas, magnanimous ideas, and then he goes and he plows through it. And sometimes he gets tired of that one because he encountered resistance. This is a little harder than I thought. And that's cooperating with the fabric of reality. That's being formed by it. And without that.
But imagine it's because he's experiencing the real, right? Yeah. And he sees the latent potency in that reality. He says, I can apply my intellect and my skill in order to try to draw out those latent potentialities into actuality. And but it all starts with contact with reality, with being.
Yes.
And a love for creation and desire to bring those things to reality. But my main concern is, again, with the current culture that we're kind of living in, is that, and this reminds me of Dante's Inferno, right? If the very first vestibule of hell is filled with the indifferent, those who neither deserve blame or praise, right? They're just indifferent souls. And so it's so much better for everyone just to act, just to do. Even if your doing perhaps is inordinate and your loves aren't properly ordered yet, it's still better than not doing. Like if you see the punishment that they're receiving, right? They're being constantly chased by stinging gnats and wasps and flies. And it's kind of they're ripping their fleshes apart, and they're being driven by these bugs, and they're crying, and the blood is pouring off of them, and as a consequence, they're running on a carpet of maggots that are consuming all their foul, festering wounds. And just act, just anything, experience reality, and then do.
Yes, yeah.
And so that's my advice, anyone, to people who are kind of interested in the rural life, just go for it.
Yeah,
just do it.
Yeah.
Yes, and hit the limits, hit the boundaries of it, and that's really where order has a chance to precipitate and manifest itself in all of its beauty, is when you run up against those limits. And because that's another lie of our culture, is that limits are bad. It's the unlimited indulgence and infinite options. And it's like, that is the ugliest thing. That's what we call chaos. That is ugly and miserable. But it's actually, and so we're in this weird position in modern life where we have to impose limitations that maybe our ancestors just had by nature. They were there because the technology wasn't. And so we have to artificially create and put up limits and look weird, so that we can live within them. And that's where that's where the beauty is. That's where the order precipitates and becomes visible. And I always, I just think the sonnet is the best example of that. It's the most limited, constrained way to write poetry. It's not free verse. which is more like free verse is more like vomit than poetry. It's just random, limitless, no horizon, so no sunset. But a sonnet is like so prescribed by form and content. Like you got to have a conflict, a revolution. You got to have a certain number of lines. You got to have a beat. You got to have iambic pentameter. So prescribed, so constraining. And you find that when you actually force yourself into those limits, that's when you actually get beyond yourself, your own natural limits. And that's where the order again becomes visible. Yeah. And the order is so much more beautiful. And I think the rural life can do that. But it's a intentional act of will to impose what is kind of, it's an artifice. It's an artificial limitation, because you can just go down and load up at the local QT, which has everything. QTs are a phenomena here in Oklahoma that we did not experience in Washington. No. It's a gas station, but it has everything and nothing, right? Of course, but it puts itself out there as a place for food and fuel and
like an oasis.
Everything, yeah.
Well, we don't want to wrap up, but we're coming up close to time. Is there anything else that you can share with us? Things that you're thinking about, pondering right now, writing about in general, or maybe something we haven't covered regarding virtue or happiness or natural law even. I keep coming back to natural law, I guess, because we throw that term around a lot here. It's such a funny word or phrase because it's like nature, which sounds really like crunchy and like hippie almost to our generation, but law, it's like, which is so rigorous and limiting, and yeah. I love the thought, the idea, the terminology. I guess you have to know a little bit about law in general to situate it, but I don't know. Is there anything that you can share with us about it?
Yeah, it kind of ties into what we were stating in regards to the beauty of order. Mm-hmm. And I think there is I think you're right, Laura, to kind of point out a lot of confusion around that term. And it does seem to be paradoxical in its articulation. But ultimately, law in general for St. Thomas, he speaks about law as a teacher. That law ultimately is to make men good, right? That's the principal or end of law, is to make us good. And so it kind of falls within the spectrum of various laws that St. Thomas lays out, the chief of which is the eternal law, which is simply God's understanding and governance of the entire cosmos as this omnipotent being, right? He knows all, sees all, and orders all things according to his divine plan. And then natural law is simply our capacity as rational creatures to perceive and understand that ordering, and then order ourselves and other things in accordance with that law. So a lot of people think of kind of natural law as some kind of infused law that we have as a consequence of our nature, but it's not. It's simply our rational comprehension of God's eternal law. Yeah. And we can do that because we're rational creatures, right? We have the capacity to think and to understand and to see the ordering of things. And so therefore we can either act in accordance with it or we can reject it because we have this unique thing called volition, the intellectual appetite. First thing is required then, if we're going to be participants of and docile to the natural law, is we have to actually experience reality, right? We have to actually see reality and try to understand it. And again, this is the problem with screen technology, right? Is that it curates that for us. And so we don't really understand the eternal law because we're not experiencing the natural ebbs and flows and governance of the world. And everything has been blotted out or marred or transformed into something other than God's creative ordering of things. And we can see this everywhere and anywhere in our society. Mm-hmm. And so it's a huge impediment. Again, and this is another kind of apologia, a defense of the rural life. It's because you're able to see in a very concrete way how things are meant to be ordered, how things are ordered based upon your experience of things. And it also calls forth, I think, right, in order for us to actually be able to see how God orders things, it has a disposition of kind of passive receptivity. We ourselves, and this is Joseph Pieper will talk about this, right? I mean, we have to either become philosophers or poets. Is kind of his major claim, because both the philosopher and the poet gaze upon reality, or the artist, right? A poet in a very general sense, like an artist. And so we need to have the leisure, and again, that's just kind of contrary to our modern culture. We live in this workaday world. We're constantly going. But we had to actually have a leisurely stance by which we can actually perceive how things are governed. And only then can we begin to use our intellect to see how we can act in accordance with that. So we need leisure. We need to experience robust engagement with reality in order to become either a philosopher or a poet. And it's interesting, of course, if you tie this in the sacred scripture, right, with the advent of Christ, the incarnation, those are the two people who recognize the Christ child as who he truly is, right? It's the shepherd and the wise man. So you either have to become a Thomist or you have to become a poet. And of course, the irony, of course, is St. Thomas is both. Right?
Yeah,
that's right. He is a poet. He was raised Benedictine, right, which is a very poetic way of experiencing reality. As a young man, he went into Monte Cassino and received a really robust musical, poetic experience with reality. And then he led this really robust intellectual life, as we know, wrote these wonderful theological and philosophical treatises on everything. And then towards his life, he returned to poetry, right? Once he kind of penetrated with his intellect as far as he could about the essence of God, he returned to prose, right? He turned to poetry. So and of course, this kind of echoes McNabb, the culture will not be renewed until, the kind of the philosopher farmer returns to the lands, right? So we need to become poetic farmers again, or contemplating farmers.
Yeah. I'll throw an idea out at you. I've been thinking about, we've been using the term Thomas or Thomist, and my soul grates at that because I think it's more proper to be calling him Saint Thomas, because it's so, as a philosopher thinker, you throw out last names just to be quick in your reference. But, I'm just so hesitant to put him on the same plane as like any other philosopher, like Heidegger or, Sartre, or even Christian ones, he's a step above. He's like, intellectually, he was a giant, but I think we've actually misunderstood him recently. I think we need to first understand him as mystic and saint. And like, when you think about what first thrust him into his writing career, and the moments of holiness that he showed, and chastity even, and the fact that he was caught being in like prayerful fellowship with St. Paul and St. Peter, even in his interpretation of scripture, like this man has miracles behind him, and so it's not just him being like wicked smart. He's like got this depth, spiritual, serious depth to him that undergirds everything.
Yeah, if you read to your point, if you read his Eucharistic hymns, it's like, oh my goodness. Right. Yeah, and of course the church elevates him, not solely because, or not even principally because of his the profundity of his thought, but rather because of his sanctity.
Yeah.
Right? This is why we uphold him principally. A man of great holiness who happened to be super smart.
Yeah. It's almost like
wicked smart.
Exactly. Yeah. I know. I'm sorry.
No, I like it.
I show what generation I'm in. It's almost like he is an example of having, I mean, he's obviously had a lot to work with genius wise. He was super with it. And even from a young age, like there's stories of him, you know, being the smart kid in class, but being humble about it. And so he started there, but then, and then he built the virtue, and then the gifts of the Holy Spirit start to take over and sort of infuse him, maybe it's the wrong technical word, but with like knowledge, like supernatural knowledge or supernatural prudence, right? There's like natural prudence, but then there's supernatural prudence, where you're seeing the end, not in just like getting a good grade or writing a good paper, but like my goal is heaven now. So what is the thing that will actually bring about beatitude more? And so you see in him like the cooperation of his natural base of talent, but then how the Holy Spirit grew that, you know, and so you have nature, but then you have grace operating and the full flowering of an intellectual in him.
Yeah. And of course, we're just about to celebrate March 7th, right? The 750th anniversary of his passing, of his death. Yeah. There's a huge conference happening at Tulsa University. I don't know if you guys are aware of this.
Yeah.
Yes. So we're going to be there. I'm going to be there for at least the Mass. There's going to be a Dominican Old Rite Mass at the cathedral.
Correct.
And our little Scola is going to be the Scola. So I'm learning I'm learning the Dominican chant right now, which is annotated a little more simply than Gregorian chant. But we'll be there. Wonderful. And then, you know, we could actually, the other major benefit of St. Thomas is that he's alive.
Yeah, that's right.
We can seek his intercession, you know, and understated the philosophy of the church. And I don't know if you can get much better than that.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
And so are you giving a talk at that?
Yeah, I'll be a part of a panel discussion. I think it's on the Friday. Yeah, because I'm teaching Saturday, so it's the Friday.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm very excited. It should be a good conference. One of my mentors who taught me in my graduate program will be there as well, Matthew Lebron. Okay. So a really brilliant scholar. So he should be there as well. So yeah, a reunion of sorts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw your teaching on teaching Thomas, right? Or educating.
That's right.
Yeah. I wish I
forget the name of the talk. Maybe Thomas on the liberal arts or something along those lines. Okay. Yeah, it should be a good conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But good things are happening in Tulsa.
Yeah.
Right? The Sheards are here. We have like St. Thomas renewal that's happening in the area. Again, it's just the oddest thing in the world. In Oklahoma, this resurgence of the thought of St. Thomas.
I know. Maybe it's all the natural limitations of living in Oklahoma.
Perhaps. Yeah, that's right.
Dr. Meloche, before we go, tell us a little bit about the projects that you're working on right now. Anything you can share, any institutes you're currently wanting to share with us or promote?
Yeah, well, you know, I oversee the Alcuin Institute for Catholic Culture. And so, this is a regional institute that is principally charged with the formation of educators. And so we work with teachers and people in parishes, informing them how to teach and what to teach in regards to the Catholic faith and the larger Catholic intellectual tradition. And again, a lot of the emphasis that we do is on the poetic mode, right? Trying to reform their imaginations, thicken their imaginations in regards to the great tradition, because in many ways, just we don't know what we've lost. So kind of reintroducing them to the spiritual, intellectual, and philosophical tradition of the church. And we do that in many ways. As you know, we kind of have farm events. We have high cultural events. We have low cultural events. So usually during the feast of St. Martin, we'll have some kind of farm event where we have people out to the land, exposing them to agrarian way of life. But then we have high cultural events. We'll have we just had a formal waltz in February, where we invite people to put on their tuxedos and have cocktails and learn how to waltz under a live music. Again, everything is, trying to contact with the real. And then we have all kinds of teaching engagements as well throughout the year. So that keeps me pretty busy.
Yeah.
And then aside from that, I'm farming. But what I'm really interested in doing, and we're going to have a date coming up soon, is that we want to do something much more intimate on the farm. So we want to have, my wife and I have kind of intellectual retreats for couples, where we bring them in and we just have like an afternoon or a morning with them, have a kind of shared reading, a shared discussion, followed by a really good, wholesome, toothsome meal. So, yeah.
Yes.
That sounds awesome.
Manuela is
count me in.
A domestic genius, I have to just say, online. And when I first when Brandon first came home, he was wowed by her hospitality, and then when I met her, she was an inspiration to me too. So
yeah, I'm very lucky. She's a blessing for sure.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could get our muck boots on together and start tying some pig intestines just to make sure we're really doing our duty as well as we ought.
I have not done that before. I should learn. You guys can teach me how to tie the knot. Hopefully,
if you've ever done balloon animals, that is a transferable skill.
There you go.
I was just gonna ask when your book on farming with St. Thomas or something is going to come out. Because I think you should.
I've been asked to write that book, and I have a writing project right now. I'm looking at Alcuin on education, so I'm teasing that out. And then I have an article on farming, specifically on the kind of the epistemological question that we're talking about. So I have to write a large article on that, and then hopefully I'll have some time to think through these things. But another big question, we didn't get a chance to talk about it today, but on technology.
Yes.
We've talked about it before, and I just find it incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
And problematic.
We'll do it. We'll do it. Maybe we'll do it Feast of, I was trying to think of the next major, like St. Joseph comes to mind because he was like the ultimate tecton, but fleshing that out, we'll see. We've got a lot coming up in March, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I love talking to you guys.
You as well.
We'll do it again. I feel like we've got this technology sorted out a little bit, and so maybe we can use it as to undermine technology at a future time.
Thank you again, Meatsmiths, for listening to our take on all things meat making, householding, and culture keeping. We hope it's helped you in growing your home around the harvest.